For this next video on intervals, we're going to attack them on paper. And again, we're going to use E as our root note, and we're going to reference the E major scale. So on the keyboard, the E major scale looks and sounds like this. So it's a pattern of steps of 2 and 1, or in other language we call that tone and semitone, you may have heard. And I'll write that up without a key signature here. So we go root, we go 2, 2, then we have the step of 1, and the step of 2, and then another 2, and then another 2, and then a 1, to get us to the final E at the top. So that is E major now. La 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 la. Now, just below our scale, let's just group those 4 sharps that we've used into a key signature. So I'll just draw a little stave here. And I need to write those 4 sharps, but I need to write them in the set order for a key signature. So the F sharp comes first, then the C sharp, then the G sharp, and then the D sharp. And that is the key signature of E major. Now, if I turn this major scale into a group of intervals, all I do to do that is I place an E underneath each of these notes. And now we've got a set of intervals. And my top note is rising according to the rules of E major. So every time we hit a note like F, which is touched by the key signature, the F has to become F sharp. The G becomes G sharp. The C becomes C sharp. And the D becomes D sharp, because that's what I need to make that major step pattern rising from the root note of E. Now, because I've obeyed the key signature, all the intervals that I've made are major or perfect. None of them are minor. Let's write them in. This one is a major second, so I'm going to use capital M and the number 2. This one's a major third, capital M, number 3. This one here is a perfect fourth, and that's a perfect fifth. Now, the easiest way to explain why that's a perfect fourth and a fifth is that whether we use a minor scale or a major scale, we use those same intervals. So the fourth, the fifth, and actually the octave are consistent between the major scale and the minor scale. So we can't call them major intervals. There's a little exception there that both minor and major scales use the major second. But that's just because we needed to call that something, and we need to call the interval of 1 on the clock a semitone something. So we called the semitone a minor second, the major second. But beyond that, if you follow the rules of the major scale, you make major and perfect intervals. If you follow the rules of the minor scale, in particular the natural minor or Aeolian scale, then you make minor and perfect intervals. So the perfect intervals are consistent between both scale types. So this one here is a major sixth, and that's a major seventh. So when we count those, count the root note as 1, and then just with your finger look up the scale. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's a major 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a perfect fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So I'll just get my E again here. La. Now, we can start to put in some alternative options for the thirds and the sixth and the seventh to make the minor intervals. Now, the minor intervals are going to look the same as far as their stave position. So a third is always going to look like this. It's always going to be 2 lines neighbouring or 2 spaces neighbouring. But I don't use a sharp, I use the normal G. And because I have not obeyed the G sharp of the key signature, I've actually made a -1 on this note, on the chromatic clock, and I've made that interval smaller. If you listen to the sound of it, this is the E to G sharp, this is the E to G. So I've made a -1. And that's how I can turn this interval into a minor third. So you'll see the manuscript position stays the same, but in this case a sharp is not used, and so the interval's smaller. The fourth and the fifth we'll leave untouched. We can actually sharpen the fourth or flatten the fifth to make what we call augmented or diminished intervals, but that's not my topic right at the moment. We're going to stick with perfects, with minors and majors. So what happens if I take the major sixth? I take the same manuscript positions, but I don't obey the C sharp and I allow a C natural. That's going to be a minor sixth. And if I do the same with the seventh, I create an interval here, which is still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but I don't allow the sharp, and so that becomes a minor seventh. So if we remember our key signature, we can look at any of these intervals in isolation and say, right, I've got an E and a C. If I was an E major, what note would C be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It would be note 6. Now, what's the key signature of E major? E major has a C sharp. So this cannot be a major sixth, because that C would be sharpened, because I would need to use the major scale to find it. So it must be the minor sixth. In the same way, we could take this one in isolation and say root note E, da 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 da. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's 7 notes. So the interval is going to be a seventh. And then I check my key signature. What is the note D in E major? Is it sharpened? Yes, it is. I have therefore obeyed the rules of E major, so I've created a major interval. And that's the way that our key signature knowledge can help us with our intervals.